What tangled webs did royals weave through history? What happens when duty clashed with desire and power collided with passion? From ancient empires to modern monarchies, the story of queens often includes whispers of scandal, defiance, and downright explosive personal lives. Across centuries of royal history, hearts were broken, kingdoms were shaken, and the very idea of tradition was turned on its head. Number 1. Caroline of Brunswick and George IV of United Kingdom, 1795. The year was 1795, and the British monarchy found itself in a tangle of debt, expectation, and a rather unenthusiastic groom. George, Prince of Wales, was a man of considerable appetites, and even more considerable debts. He was, by all accounts, charming when he wanted to be, but also self-indulgent and prone to grand gestures. His life had been a whirlwind of mistresses, lavish parties, and a secret illegal marriage to Maria Fitzherbert, a Catholic widow. But the British Parliament and the King, George III, had a clear message for their heir. Marry a suitable princess, produce a legitimate heir, and they would clear his enormous financial burden. The chosen bride was Caroline of Brunswick, a German princess, and George's first cousin. She was spirited, unconventional, and had a reputation for being somewhat unrefined by the strict standards of the British court. However, she was available Protestant and from a respectable lineage. The marriage was arranged with a clear purpose: dynastic stability and financial relief for the prince. No one, perhaps least of all, the prospective bride and groom, seemed to consider personal compatibility. When Caroline arrived in England, the stage was set for a dramatic first encounter. Stuart, who had cultivated a rather romanticized image of his future wife, was reportedly horrified. Accounts from those present speak of his gasp, his recoiling, and his demand for a glass of brandy. He found her appearance and manners distinctly unappealing. He whispered to an aide that he never should have been compelled to marry her. Caroline, for her part, was equally unimpressed, reportedly finding him fat, arrogant, and ill-mannered. The spark of animosity was immediate and incandescent. The wedding ceremony itself was a tense affair. George, heavily intoxicated, struggled to stand straight throughout the proceedings. Reportedly leaning against the altar, Caroline looked pale and distressed. It was a spectacle of public duty, performed with immense personal revulsion. Their wedding night was, by Caroline's later accounts, brief and unpleasant, marked by George's inebriation and his immediate departure. Claimed they only had sexual relations 3 times, each time under duress. Within months, their only child, Princess Charlotte, was born. But even the joy of an heir could not bridge the chasm between them. Couples separated permanently, just days after Charlotte's birth. George barred Caroline from appearing at court and restricted her access to their daughter. Continued his extravagant lifestyle and his relationships with other women, notably Lady Jersey and later the Marchioness of Hertford. Caroline, isolated and largely banished from court life, found herself in a precarious position. She refused to be a quiet, dignified exile. Instead, she gathered her own small court and maintained a more informal and boisterous household, which quickly became the subject of rumor and gossip. Her independent spirit and perceived lack of decorum fueled relentless whispers about her behavior and even her fidelity. In 1806, George launched a formal investigation into her conduct, known as the Delicate Investigation. A commission was appointed to examine claims that Caroline had borne an illegitimate child. The investigation, while ultimately inconclusive and largely discrediting the most serious allegations, further solidified public opinion against her in some quarters, yet also garnered her sympathy from others who saw her as a victim of her husband's cruelty. As the years passed, George's father, King George III, descended into increasing mental incapacity. In 1811, George became Prince Regent, effectively ruling the country. His animosity towards Caroline intensified. He became determined to formalize their separation or even divorce her, a move fraught with political and religious complications. Meanwhile, Caroline, feeling increasingly marginalized in England, decided to travel abroad in 1814. She spent several years touring Europe, living freely and continuing to defy conventional royal expectations. Travels were shadowed by George's agents, who collected every piece of gossip and alleged impropriety, compiling a dossier that would later become a powerful weapon against her. The death of their daughter, Princess Charlotte, in 1817 was a national tragedy and a devastating blow. Charlotte had been immensely popular and was seen as the hope for the monarchy's future. Her death, followed by her stillborn child, meant the direct line of succession was again uncertain, placing even more pressure on the remaining royal children to produce heirs. For Caroline, it meant losing her primary connection to England and her only source of shared parenthood with George. When King George III died in January 1820, George, Prince Regent, ascended the throne as George IV. This moment sparked the greatest crisis of his reign and brought the controversy surrounding his marriage to Caroline to a head. Caroline, now legally Queen Consort of the United Kingdom, made it clear she intended to return to England to claim her rightful place at court. George IV, however, was equally determined to prevent this. He was resolute in his refusal to acknowledge her as queen, even offering her a large annual allowance if she would remain abroad and give up the title. Caroline, with characteristic defiance, rejected the offer. She returned to England in June 1820 to a rapturous public reception. Thousands lined the streets to cheer her, viewing her as a wronged woman oppressed by a tyrannical husband. Her cause became a rallying point for those critical of the monarchy and the government. George IV, furious at her return and the public support she garnered, ordered his government to introduce a bill in Parliament to dissolve their marriage and deprive her of the title of queen. This was the Bill of Pains and Penalties, effectively a public trial for adultery and misconduct. Trial held in the House of Lords became a national sensation. It lasted for weeks, with salacious details of Caroline's alleged affairs abroad being paraded before the nation. Witnesses were called, some of whom were highly unreliable, and the evidence was often contradictory. Caroline's legal team, led by Henry Brougham, mounted a vigorous defense, highlighting the weakness of the prosecution's case and emphasizing George IV's own well-known infidelities and cruelty towards his wife. Newspapers reported every detail, and caricatures depicting both George as a villain and Caroline as a martyr filled the streets. The government faced immense pressure from popular demonstrations and petitions supporting Caroline. The bill, though it passed its second reading by a narrow margin, faced an increasingly hostile political and public climate. Knowing it would likely fail in the House of Commons and further damage the monarchy, the government ultimately withdrew the bill. Caroline had won a significant moral victory, but her legal status remained ambiguous. She was queen, but unrecognized by the king. The final act of this marital drama unfolded at George IV's coronation in July 1821. Despite her legal right to be present, Caroline was physically barred from Westminster Abbey. She arrived at the Abbey gates demanding entry, only to be turned away by guards and soldiers under strict orders. Her efforts to enter different doors were met with the same rejection. The sight of the Queen of the United Kingdom being publicly humiliated and denied entry to her husband's coronation, while cheering crowds watched, cemented her image as a defiant figure. Humiliated and exhausted, Caroline fell ill shortly after the coronation. She died in August 1821, just weeks after the dramatic events, her body taken back to Brunswick for burial, despite the public's desire for a funeral in England. Controversy surrounding her marriage and treatment left an indelible mark on the British monarchy, exposing the deep divisions within the royal family and between the crown and the public. Number 2. Catherine the Great and Peter III of Russia. 1745. The imperial court of Russia in the mid-18th century was a place of dazzling splendor, intricate intrigue, and ruthless power plays. Into this world, a young German princess, Sophie of Anhalt-Zerbst, arrived in 1744. She was destined to marry Grand Duke Peter, the nephew and heir of the formidable Empress Elizabeth. This marriage, arranged for dynastic purposes, was meant to secure the succession of the Romanov dynasty and strengthen Russia's ties with European powers. From the outset, however, it was a union marked by fundamental incompatibility, mutual dislike, and a growing chasm of ambition and personality that would eventually have explosive consequences for Russia. Sophie, upon her arrival, immersed herself in Russian culture. She diligently studied the Russian language, converted to Orthodox Christianity, taking the name Catherine, and made a concerted effort to endear herself to the Empress Elizabeth and the Russian people. She was intelligent, ambitious, and adaptable, quickly understanding the nuances of court politics. Peter, on the other hand, was everything Catherine was not. He was immature, deeply interested in military drills and toy soldiers, and openly scornful of Russian customs, language, and the Orthodox faith. He adored his native Prussia and held an almost fanatical admiration for Frederick the Great. His behavior was often erratic, childish, and to the Russian court deeply un-imperial. The marriage itself took place in 1745. The initial years were bleak for Catherine. Peter, it quickly became clear, was not interested in a conventional marital relationship. He preferred the company of his mistresses, particularly Elizabeth Vorontsova, and often treated Catherine with indifference or outright contempt. He was rumored to be impotent or sexually inexperienced, and their marriage remained unconsummated for many years. Catherine, left largely to her own devices, dedicated herself to reading, cultivating relationships with influential courtiers, and slowly building a network of support. She endured Peter's open philandering and his often cruel pranks, all while maintaining a facade of stoicism. The lack of an heir became a significant source of anxiety for Empress Elizabeth and the court. Finally, in 1754, Catherine gave birth to a son, Paul. Paternity of Paul was immediately questioned, with many historians suggesting that he was not Peter's son, but rather the son of Sergei Saltykov, one of Catherine's early lovers. Regardless of the truth, Paul's birth secured the succession, but it did little to improve the imperial couple's relationship. Empress Elizabeth took Paul away almost immediately, raising him herself, further isolating Catherine. As Empress Elizabeth's health declined, Peter's behavior became increasingly erratic and concerning. He openly criticized the Russian army, mocked the Orthodox Church, and made clear his intention to reverse Russia's foreign policy. Particularly regarding the 7 Years' War, Russia had been fighting against Prussia, but Peter, a fervent admirer of Frederick the Great, made a sudden and inexplicable peace, returning all conquered territories to Prussia. This decision was met with widespread dismay and anger among the Russian nobility and military, who saw it as a betrayal of their sacrifices and a humiliation for the nation. In December 1761, Empress Elizabeth died, and Peter ascended to the throne as Emperor Peter III. His brief reign, lasting only 6 months, was a whirlwind of impulsive and deeply unpopular decisions. Confiscated church lands, introduced reforms that alienated the nobility, and continued to openly demonstrate his contempt for Russian traditions. He threatened to divorce Catherine, declared his intention to marry Elizabeth Vorontsova, and even began preparations for a war against Denmark, a move that seemed utterly nonsensical to his advisors. His constant drills and demands on the Guards' regiments, forcing them to adopt Prussian uniforms and tactics, further alienated the very soldiers who were meant to protect him. Catherine, meanwhile, cultivated her image as the true heir to Elizabeth's legacy. A devout Orthodox believer, a patriotic Russian, and a capable leader, in stark contrast to her husband's perceived foreign leanings and incompetence. She was intelligent, cunning, and had slowly garnered the loyalty of key figures within the military and the court, including Grigory Orlov and his brothers, influential Guards officers who were also her lovers. The situation came to a dramatic head in June 1762. Peter, having openly insulted and threatened Catherine, compounded his blunders with a plan to arrest her and force her into a convent. The conspiracy against him, brewing for months, was ignited. On the morning of June 28, 1762, Catherine, supported by the Orloff brothers and the Loyal Guards regiments, rode into St. Petersburg. She was declared empress by the Holy Synod, and the Senate and the regiments swore allegiance to her. Peter, caught completely off guard at his summer palace in Oranienbaum, initially attempted to resist, then surrendered and abdicated. Peter was imprisoned at Ropsha, a remote estate. Just days later, on July 17, 1762, he died under mysterious circumstances. Official reports claimed he died of a hemorrhoidal colic exacerbated by heavy drinking, but it was widely believed, then and now, that he was murdered by Alexei Orloff, Grigory's brother, and other conspirators loyal to Catherine. His death removed the last impediment to Catherine's rule and solidified her position as empress. The marriage of Catherine and Peter, initially a politically motivated union, became a crucible of personal torment, political maneuvering, and ultimately a coup that reshaped Russian history. It was controversial, not for its inception, but for its complete breakdown, Peter's shocking deposition, and his subsequent death, all of which propelled Catherine to the throne. Catherine went on to rule for 34 years, becoming one of Russia's most powerful and influential monarchs, known as Catherine the Great. But her rise was inextricably linked to the dramatic and scandalous end of her marriage to Peter III, a controversy that echoed through the imperial courts of Europe for decades. Number 3. Mary, Queen of Scots, and Henry Stuart. Lord Darnley, 1565. In the tumultuous mid-16th century, Scotland was a kingdom torn by religious strife and competing political allegiances. Mary, Queen of Scots, a young Medidic and devout Catholic monarch, had returned from France in 1561 to reclaim her throne. Her beauty and intelligence were renowned, but her Catholic faith in a Protestant-leaning nation and her strong ties to France made her reign a precarious balancing act. The question of her marriage was of paramount importance, not just for her personal happiness, but for the stability of her kingdom and the succession of both the Scottish and potentially the English crowns. Among the many suitors vying for her hand, one figure stood out. Henry Stuart? Lord Darnley? Darnley was a tall, handsome, and arrogant young man, a first cousin to Mary through their shared grandmother, Margaret Tudor. This meant he also had a strong claim to both the Scottish and English thrones. For Mary, a marriage to Darnley offered several perceived advantages. It would strengthen her claim to the English succession by uniting the two primary claimants. It would also avoid a foreign marriage which could antagonize her Protestant subjects and alarm her cousin, Queen Elizabeth I of England, who viewed Mary's potential heirs with suspicion. Despite these political benefits, the marriage was controversial from the very beginning. Darnley was an English subject, albeit a Scottish noble, and his marriage to Mary was seen by many, including Elizabeth I, as a provocative move that could undermine England's stability. Elizabeth explicitly disapproved of the match, fearing it would enhance Mary's claim to her throne and lead to a Catholic resurgence. She had even offered alternative, less threatening matches for Mary. Beyond the political objections, Darnley himself was a deeply problematic choice. He was ambitious but also immature, petulant, and given to drink and violence. He quickly grew jealous of Mary's power and authority, demanding the crown matrimonial which would have made him co-sovereign, essentially placing him on equal footing with the Queen. Mary, initially infatuated, refused his demands for ultimate power. His behavior alienated many at court, including powerful Scottish nobles. The marriage took place on July 29, 1565, in the Chapel Royal at Holyrood Palace. Mary, dressed in black, a symbolic gesture of humility, pledged her vows. The wedding was a public display, but the growing tensions beneath the surface were palpable. Immediately after the marriage, Darnley's true character became even more apparent. He alienated Mary's closest advisors and became increasingly difficult to manage. His drunken outbursts and boasts became legendary. and his constant demands for greater power created deep friction between him and Mary. The controversy surrounding the marriage escalated dramatically with the murder of David Rizzio in March 1566. Rizzio was Mary's private secretary, a talented Italian musician and diplomat who had become her trusted advisor and close confidant. Darnley, fueled by jealousy, convinced himself that Rizzio was having an affair with Mary and was usurping his own influence, conspired with a group of Protestant lords who felt marginalized by Mary and resented Rizzio's influence. On the evening of March 9, 1566, while Mary, heavily pregnant with their son James, was dining with Rizzio and a few others in her private chambers at Holyrood Palace, Darnley and his co-conspirators burst in. Rizzio was dragged from her presence, screaming, and brutally stabbed to death in an adjacent room, reportedly 56 times. Mary was physically restrained by Darnley during the horrific event. The murder of Rizzio was a shocking act of violence against the Queen's person and her authority. It exposed the deep rifts within the Scottish court and the dangerous instability of Mary's marriage. Mary, though terrified, showed remarkable courage. She managed to turn Darnley against his co-conspirators, briefly winning back his trust, and then escaped Edinburgh to gather loyal forces. The immediate aftermath saw a period of intense political maneuvering and shifting alliances. Despite the profound betrayal in their increasingly hostile relationship, Mary and Darnley remained married. Perhaps for the sake of their unborn child and the appearance of legitimacy, their son James, later James VI of Scotland and James I of England, was born in June 1566. The birth of an heir, a Protestant one at that, was a moment of hope for the future of the Scottish monarchy, but it did little to heal the wounds between his parents. Mary's disdain for Darnley grew, and she openly discussed her desire to be rid of him. The final devastating chapter of their controversial marriage unfolded in February 1567. Darnley, recovering from an illness, possibly syphilis or smallpox, was staying at Kirkall Field, a house just outside Edinburgh. Mary visited him there, seemingly to reconcile, but her true intentions remain debated by historians. On the night of February 9 to 10, 1567, two explosions rocked Kirkall Field. The house was blown apart. Darnley's body, along with that of his valet, was found in a nearby orchard, seemingly unharmed by the explosion, suggesting they had been strangled or smothered before the blast. The murder of Darnley sent shockwaves across Europe. The immediate finger of suspicion pointed towards James Hepburn, 4th Earl of Bothwell, a powerful Scottish noble who had been increasingly close to her. However, Mary herself also fell under a cloud of suspicion. Many believed she was complicit in the murder, or at the very least, knew of the plot and did nothing to prevent it. Her subsequent actions only fueled these suspicions. She failed to pursue a thorough investigation into Darnley's murder. Then, just 3 months after Darnley's death, she married Bothwell, who had recently been acquitted of the murder in a hastily arranged trial. This third marriage to a man widely implicated in her previous husband's murder was perhaps the most controversial decision of Mary's life. It proved to be a catastrophic political misstep. It alienated even her most loyal supporters, turning public opinion decisively against her. The Scottish lords, outraged by her hasty marriage to Bothwell and convinced of her complicity in Darnley's death, rose in rebellion. Within weeks, Mary was captured, imprisoned, and forced to abdicate in favor of her infant son James. She spent the next 19 years in captivity in England before her execution on Elizabeth I's order in 1587. The marriage to Darnley, a union designed to secure her position instead, became the catalyst for her downfall, forever etching its controversial, violent, and tragic story into the annals of royal history. Number 4. Mary I of England and Philip II of Spain. 1554. The year was 1554, and England was on a precipice. Queen Mary I, the devout Catholic daughter of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon, had ascended the throne in 1553 After the brief Protestant-led attempt to install Lady Jane Grey, Mary was determined to reverse the religious reforms of her father and her half-brother, Edward VI, and restore England to the Roman Catholic Church. Her deeply personal faith and unwavering commitment to this goal shaped her entire reign, and nowhere was this more apparent or more controversial than in her choice of husband. Mary was 37 years old when she became queen, considered old for marriage in that era, and desperately needed an heir to secure the Catholic succession and prevent her Protestant half-sister Elizabeth from inheriting the throne. Several suitors were considered, but Mary's heart and mind were set on a match that embodied her religious and political convictions: Philip II of Spain. Philip was the son of the powerful Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, a staunch Catholic, and the heir to a vast European empire that included Spain, the Netherlands, and territories in the Americas. From the moment the proposed marriage was announced, it ignited a firestorm of opposition across England. Controversy was multifaceted and deeply rooted in the political, religious, and economic anxieties of the time. The English people, particularly the Protestant majority, harbored a deep-seated fear and suspicion of Spain. Spain was seen as a dominant, powerful, and Catholic nation, often viewed as England's rival. The prospect of an English queen marrying the heir to the Spanish Empire raised fears of England becoming a mere satellite state, subservient to Spanish interests. There were concerns that English wealth would be drained to fund Spanish wars, that English trade would suffer, and that Spanish customs and influence would overwhelm English traditions. Philip was a zealous Catholic, a key figure in the Counter-Reformation. Many feared that his influence would lead to a brutal crackdown on Protestantism in England, similar to the Spanish Inquisition. The memory of Mary's own mother, Catherine of Aragon, being cast aside for Henry VIII's desire for a male heir and a new faith still lingered, and the idea of England returning to the Catholic fold with such a powerful Catholic alliance was terrifying to many. The English Parliament, reflecting popular sentiment, voiced strong objections. Even Mary's closest advisors, including Bishop Stephen Gardiner, her Lord Chancellor, initially urged her to choose an English husband, believing it would be less disruptive. But Mary was resolute. She saw the marriage as a divine mission, a way to bring England back into the Catholic fold and to secure a powerful ally for her kingdom. She was convinced that Philip was God's chosen husband for her. Despite the widespread opposition, Mary pressed ahead with the marriage. The terms of the marriage treaty, carefully negotiated to appease English fears, stipulated that Philip would be King of England only for Mary's lifetime, that no foreign appointments would be made without parliamentary consent, and that England would not be drawn into Spain's wars. However, these clauses did little to assuage public anxiety. The discontent erupted into armed rebellion. In January 1554, Sir Thomas Wyatt the Younger led a significant uprising known as Wyatt's Rebellion, specifically aimed at preventing the Spanish marriage and potentially deposing Mary in favor of Elizabeth. Although the rebellion was ultimately crushed, and Lady Jane Grey was executed as a result, it underscored the depth of public anger and the fragility of Mary's reign. The wedding itself took place on July 25, 1554, at Winchester Cathedral. Philip, a serious and reserved man, arrived in England with a large Spanish entourage. He spoke no English, and his austere demeanor did little to endear him to the English people. Mary, for her part, was deeply in love with Philip, or at least with the idea of him. She had a profound need for affection and companionship, something she had largely been denied throughout her turbulent life. The ceremony was a grand affair, designed to project power and legitimacy, but it was overshadowed by the widespread disapproval of the match. The immediate aftermath of the marriage saw Mary, with Philip's encouragement, intensify her efforts to restore Catholicism. Persecution of Protestants began in earnest, earning her the infamous nickname Bloody Mary. Hundreds of Protestants were burned at the stake for heresy. This further fueled anti-Spanish sentiment, as many believed. Philip was the driving force behind the religious persecution, though Mary herself was a fervent believer in the necessity of purging heresy. Philip, despite the terms of the treaty, did attempt to exert influence over English policy. He brought Spanish advisors to court, and his presence was seen as a constant reminder of England's perceived subservience. He was polite, but distant, and his presence did not bring the desired heir. Mary suffered from phantom pregnancies, believing herself to be pregnant multiple times, a poignant reflection of her desperate desire for a child. These pregnancies further highlighted the precarious nature of the succession. Philip's stay in England was relatively brief. He found the English climate and court uncongenial, and he had vast imperial responsibilities elsewhere. He left England for good in August 1555, after just over a year, returning only briefly in 1557 to persuade England to join Spain in a war against France. This alliance led to the loss of Calais, England's last continental possession, a humiliating defeat that deeply unpopular with the English people, and further cemented their resentment towards the Spanish alliance. The marriage to Philip II, born of Mary's religious conviction and desperate need for an heir, was a profound source of controversy throughout her reign. It alienated a large portion of her subjects, sparked rebellion, and deepened England's religious divisions. It brought little joy to Mary herself, who yearned for a child and for her husband's constant presence, neither of which materialized. When Mary died childless in November 1558, Philip made no claim to the English throne, and the English crown passed to Elizabeth, ushering in a new Protestant era. The legacy of the Anglo-Spanish marriage of Mary and Philip remained a potent reminder of the dangers of a foreign royal alliance, one that echoed in English political thought for centuries to come. Number 5. Anne Boleyn and Henry VIII of England, 1533. The story of Anne Boleyn and Henry VIII is perhaps one of the most explosive and gutting royal marriages in English history. A seismic event that not only redefined the monarchy, but shattered the very foundations of the nation's religious landscape. It was a marriage born of a king's insatiable desire for a male heir and his passionate obsession with a woman who refused to be merely a mistress. This union, and the desperate lengths taken to achieve it, plunged England into unprecedented controversy, schism, and ultimately a tragic end for the Queen. Henry VIII had been married for over 20 years to Catherine of Aragon, daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain, and the aunt of the powerful Holy Roman Emperor Charles V. Their marriage had produced only one living child, a daughter, Mary. Henry desperately craved a male heir to secure the Tudor dynasty and avoid another War of the Roses. He became convinced that his marriage to Catherine was illegitimate in the eyes of God, based on a passage in the book of Leviticus which states that a man who marries his brother's wife will be childless. Catherine had briefly been married to Henry's elder brother Arthur before his death. Despite a papal dispensation granted to allow Henry and Catherine to marry, Henry now believed it was invalid. Enter Anne Boleyn, a lady-in-waiting at Catherine's court. Anne was intelligent, witty, stylish, and magic with a captivating presence. She was not conventionally beautiful by the standards of the time, but she possessed a magnetic charm and an independent spirit. Henry fell deeply in love with her, or perhaps obsessed with her. Anne, unlike her sister Mary, who had been Henry's mistress, steadfastly refused to become the king's casual lover. She held out for marriage and the crown, a bold and dangerous gamble in an era when such aspirations for a woman of her rank were unheard of. Henry's desire for Anne and his conviction that his marriage to Catherine was invalid became intertwined. He sought an annulment from Pope Clement VII, believing his case was just. However, the Pope was in an impossible position. He was effectively a prisoner of Charles V, Catherine's nephew, who would never permit his aunt to be humiliated and cast aside. For years, Henry pursued his great matter, sending envoys to Rome, arguing his cases, and growing increasingly frustrated by papal delays and refusals. The controversy was immense. Catherine of Aragon, a popular and dignified queen, had many supporters in England and across Europe. Her marriage was widely considered valid, and her dismissal was seen by many as a cruel and unjust act. The legitimacy of any children Henry might have with Anne would be questioned by the Catholic world. Growing impatient and defiant, Henry decided to break with the Roman Catholic Church. This was not merely a divorce, but a revolution. He declared himself supreme head of the Church of England, effectively severing ties with the Pope and establishing a new independent national church. This act, known as the English Reformation, was a monumental shift in power, law, and religion. It was driven to a significant extent by Henry's desire to marry Anne Boleyn, and Henry VIII secretly married in January 1533, possibly because Anne was already pregnant. Public ceremony followed in May 1533 after Archbishop Thomas Cranmer, newly appointed by Henry, formally declared Henry's marriage to Catherine null and void. Anne was crowned queen on June 1, 1533, in a lavish ceremony at Westminster Abbey. Coronation was a public spectacle, but also a deeply divisive one. While some cheered, others remained loyal to Catherine and saw Anne as an usurper, a concubine, or the Great Whore. The very legitimacy of her queenship was questioned by a significant portion of the population, and by every Catholic power in Europe. The birth of a daughter, Elizabeth. Later, Queen Elizabeth I, in September 1533, was a bitter disappointment for Henry, who desperately wanted a son. Despite his initial joy at having a child with Anne, the pressure mounted for a male heir. Anne's inability to produce a surviving son, she suffered several miscarriages, and a stillborn child began to chip away at Henry's affection and patience. The same religious arguments that had enabled her marriage could now be used against her if she failed to fulfill her primary duty to provide a male heir. Anne's personality, once so appealing, now seemed to rub Henry the wrong way. She was opinionated and occasionally outspoken, which clashed with Henry's increasingly authoritarian nature. Her enemies at court, many of whom had opposed her rise, now saw an opportunity to bring her down. Chief among these was Thomas Cromwell, Henry's chief minister, who orchestrated a swift and brutal campaign against her. In April and May 1536, Anne Boleyn was accused of a litany of shocking charges: adultery, incest with her brother George Boleyn, and conspiracy to murder the king. These charges, widely regarded by historians as fabricated, were designed to secure her execution and clear the way for Henry to marry again. Anne was arrested and imprisoned in the Tower of London. Her trial was a travesty of justice, denying her due process and relying on flimsy circumstantial evidence and forced confessions. Despite her eloquent denials, Anne was found guilty of treason. Her brother and 4 other men accused of being her lovers were also condemned and executed. On May 19, 1536, just over 3 years after her coronation, Anne Boleyn was beheaded within the confines of the Tower of London, marking a gruesome end to her controversial queenship. Her execution was unprecedented for an English queen. The marriage of Anne Boleyn and Henry VIII was controversial, from its scandalous beginnings to its brutal end. It tore England from the papacy, reshaped the religious and political landscape of the nation, and demonstrated the terrifying power of a king determined to have his way. Anne's brief reign as queen was a whirlwind of triumph and tragedy, forever etched in history as a symbol of ambition, defiance, and the perilous nature of royal love in a time of absolute power. Number 6. Catherine of Aragon and Henry VIII of England. 1509. Before Anne Boleyn, there was Catherine of Aragon, the Spanish princess whose marriage to Henry VIII would ignite a controversy so profound it would shatter centuries of religious unity in England and leave an indelible mark on European history. This was not a marriage controversial in its inception, but rather in its contentious dissolution, a process that consumed a king and a kingdom for years. Catherine was born in 1485, the daughter of the formidable Catholic monarchs Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain, who had united Spain and funded Christopher Columbus's voyages. She was a princess of immense political and dynastic importance, destined to forge a powerful alliance between Spain and England. Her journey to England began when she was just 15, arriving to marry Arthur, Prince of Wales, Henry VII's elder son and heir. The marriage took place in November 1501, a grand affair designed to secure the fledgling Tudor dynasty through a powerful European alliance. However, just 5 months after the wedding tragedy struck, Prince Arthur died suddenly, likely from sweating sickness, leaving Catherine a young widow in a foreign land. The Anglo-Spanish alliance was too important to lose. So, a new plan was forged. Catherine was betrothed to Arthur's younger brother, the new Prince of Wales, Henry, who was just 10 years old. This proposed marriage immediately presented a canonical problem. A man was forbidden by biblical law. Leviticus chapter 20, verse 21. From marrying his brother's widow. To overcome this, a special dispensation from the Pope was required. Pope Julius II granted the dispensation in 1503, stating that the previous marriage had been unconsummated, a key point that would later be fiercely debated. The second marriage did not happen immediately. Henry VII, always shrewd and cautious, delayed it partly due to political shifts and perhaps doubts about the cost of Catherine's dowry. It was only upon Henry VII's death in 1509, when the vibrant and confident young Henry VIII ascended the throne, that the marriage finally took place. Just weeks after his coronation, Henry VIII, then 18, married Catherine of Aragon, 23, in a private ceremony. They were crowned together in Westminster Abbey, a symbol of their unity and the strength of the Tudor dynasty. For nearly 2 decades, their marriage appeared stable and happy. Catherine was a respected, intelligent, and dignified queen. She was popular with the English people, a skilled diplomat, and even served as regent during Henry's absence in France. She gave birth to several children, but only one, a daughter named Mary, survived infancy. The lack of a living male heir, however, became an increasingly agonizing issue for Henry. He desperately needed a son to secure the Tudor succession and avoid the turmoil of the disputed throne, something England had suffered through during the Wars of the Roses. As Catherine entered her 40s, it became clear she was unlikely to bear any more children. Henry's anxieties escalated. He began to question the legitimacy of their marriage itself, fueled by his conscience, and perhaps by his growing attraction to Anne Boleyn. Convinced himself that the papal dispensation granted for his marriage to his brother's widow was invalid because, he argued, Catherine and Arthur's marriage had been consummated. Therefore, his marriage to Catherine was forbidden by God and cursed, explaining the lack of a male heir. This sparked the Great Matter, a monumental controversy that consumed England for years. Henry sought an annulment from Pope Clement VII, effectively declaring his marriage to Catherine null from the beginning. Catherine, however, fiercely resisted. She insisted her marriage to Arthur had never been consummated, and therefore the papal dispensation was valid. She was a woman of strong will and deep conviction, determined to protect her honor, the legitimacy of her daughter Mary, and her position as Queen of England. She appealed directly to the Pope and rallied support from her nephew, the powerful Holy Roman Emperor Charles V. The ensuing legal proceedings were lengthy, complex, and highly public. Cardinals were sent from Rome to preside over a legatine court in England. Catherine delivered a powerful and emotional plea before the court, kneeling before Henry and begging him to reconsider. Her dignity and resolve earned her widespread sympathy among the English populace, who largely supported her. However, the Pope, caught between Henry's demands and Charles V's military dominance in Italy, stalled and delayed, unwilling to grant the annulment. Henry's frustration grew into fury. Convinced that the Pope would never grant his wish, he began to dismantle papal authority in England. This was not a quick or simple process. It was a gradual, deliberate break with Rome. Acts of Parliament were passed that transferred legal and religious authority from the Pope to the King, effectively making Henry the supreme head of the Church of England. This dramatic shift was driven by Henry's personal desire for a new marriage and a legitimate male heir. In May 1533, after nearly 24 years of marriage, Archbishop Thomas Cranmer, Henry's newly appointed Archbishop of Canterbury, declared Henry's marriage to Catherine null and void. Catherine was stripped of her title as Queen and relegated to the status of Dowager Princess of Wales, as if her only valid marriage had been to Arthur. She was forced to live in various isolated royal residences, separated from her daughter Mary, and forbidden from use to accept the annulment. She continued to sign her letters Catherine the Queen until her death. Her unwavering defiance and dignity in the face of immense pressure made her a powerful symbol of resistance to Henry's will. She died in January 1536, still maintaining her claim to be Henry's only legitimate wife. Her death removed the most significant obstacle to Henry's new marriage and the new religious order he had imposed on England. The controversy surrounding the annulment of Catherine's marriage to Henry VIII was monumental. It directly led to the English Reformation, forever changing England's religious and political landscape. It pitted a powerful king against a defiant queen, a loyal nation against papal authority, and ultimately divided England itself. Catherine of Aragon, a woman of deep faith and unshakable resolve, played a central role in this defining moment of English history. Her tragic fate, a direct consequence of a king's dynastic ambition and a marriage's controversial dissolution. Number 7. Isabella, the First of Castile, and Ferdinand II of Aragon. 1469. The year was 1469, and the Iberian Peninsula was a patchwork of kingdoms, chief among them Castile and Aragon. The future of Spain as we know it hung in the balance, resting on the shoulders of two young monarchs, Isabella of Castile and Ferdinand of Aragon. Their marriage was not merely a romantic union, it was a daring political gamble, a clandestine affair that defied a powerful king and a controversial step towards the unification of Spain, fraught with danger and intrigue. Isabella was a princess of Castile, intelligent, ambitious, and deeply pious. Her elder half-brother Henry IV ruled Castile, but his reign was marked by political instability and disputes over the succession. Henry had a reputation for being weak and was mockingly called the impotent. His only daughter Joanna was rumored to be illegitimate, a source of constant friction and uncertainty. Isabella, as the next in line to the throne, if Joanna were indeed illegitimate, found herself at the center of intense political maneuvering over her marriage. Henry IV preferred to use his half-sister as a pawn to secure alliances, suggesting various suitors to prevent her from aligning with his enemies. Ferdinand was the heir to the kingdom of Aragon, a younger prince with a sharp political mind, military prowess, and a reputation for shrewdness. He was equally ambitious and eager to secure his own future and that of his kingdom. He was also related to Isabella through common ancestry, a factor that would prove both advantageous and problematic. For Isabella, the choice of a husband was critical. She wanted a partner who would respect her authority, share her vision for Castile, and help her secure her claim to the throne. She rejected several politically convenient matches proposed by her brother, including a marriage to King Afonso V of Portugal. Instead, she set her sights on Ferdinand. Their union, she believed, would not only unite the two most powerful Christian kingdoms on the peninsula, but also strengthen their collective power against the last remaining Moorish stronghold of Granada and the growing power of Portugal. Controversy surrounding their marriage stemmed directly from its clandestine nature and the defiance of King Henry IV. Henry explicitly forbade Isabella from marrying Ferdinand, preferring to use her as a political bargaining chip elsewhere. He also knew that a union between Isabella and Ferdinand would create a formidable rival power bloc within Spain, potentially undermining his own authority and that of his daughter. Therefore, Isabella and Ferdinand decided to proceed in secret. Their courtship involved coded messages and dangerous journeys. In 1469, Ferdinand, disguised as a merchant, traveled through Castile with a small, trusted escort, risking capture by Henry IV's forces. Isabella, having secured an escape route, awaited him. The secret marriage took place on October 19, 1469, in the city of Valladolid, Castile. The ceremony was discreet, performed in a private home to avoid detection by Henry IV's agents. Even the papal bull granting dispensation for their marriage, which was required due to their close familial relationship, they were second cousins, was reportedly forged by Isabella's supporters to expedite the process, only to be later confirmed by a legitimate bull. This act of forgery, though quickly rectified, underscored the lengths they went to in order to legitimize their union against all odds. The moment the marriage became public, it ignited Henry IV's fury. He saw it as a direct act of rebellion and a betrayal. He immediately disinherited Isabella, proclaiming his daughter Joanna as his sole legitimate heir, and attempting to force her marriage to Afonso V of Portugal to strengthen his position. This set the stage for a period of civil war in Castile, known as the War of the Castilian Succession. For the next 10 years, Isabella and Ferdinand fought to secure her claim to the Castilian throne against Henry IV and his Portuguese allies. It was a brutal and protracted conflict, but Isabella, demonstrating remarkable military and political acumen, led her forces with determination, often personally participating in campaigns. Ferdinand, a capable military commander, also played a crucial role. Their combined forces gradually gained the upper hand, capitalizing on Henry IV's unpopularity and the widespread doubts about Joanna's legitimacy. The controversy of their marriage was thus played out on battlefields. The very act of their union was a declaration of war, challenging established authority and dynastic norms. They risked everything: their lives, their claims, and the stability of their kingdoms, for a marriage they believed was both politically essential and personally. Upon Henry IV's death in 1474, she was proclaimed Queen of Castile. The war continued against Joanna and Portugal for several more years, finally concluding with the Treaty of Alcacovas in 1479, which recognized Isabella as the legitimate Queen of Castile. In the same year, Ferdinand ascended to the throne of Aragon. The marriage of Isabella and Ferdinand, often referred to as the Catholic monarchs, was controversial because it was a defiant act of political will against a reigning king, achieved through secrecy, and ultimately, it was a union that, against all odds, proved to be one of the most successful and able in European history. Their reign, though joint, respected the separate laws and institutions of their respective kingdoms, yet their combined power allowed them to achieve monumental feats. They completed the Reconquista with the conquest of Granada in 1492, expelled Jews and Moors from Spain, and most famously sponsored Christopher Columbus's voyage, leading to the Spanish colonization of the Americas. Their marriage laid the groundwork for the unified Kingdom of Spain, a global superpower for centuries, forever linking their personal defiance to a legacy of immense historical significance. Number 8. Eleanor of Aquitaine and Henry II of England, 1152. The 12th century was an age of powerful monarchs, shifting allegiances, and dramatic personal sagas. Few figures embody this era's vibrant complexities more than Eleanor of Aquitaine. Her second marriage to Henry Plantagenet, Duke of Normandy and soon to be King of England, was a whirlwind of controversy, not just because of the swiftness of the union, but because of her previous life as Queen of France and the immense Guidian implications of her new match. Eleanor was born in 1122, inheriting the vast and wealthy Duchy of Aquitaine, a territory larger than the King of England's domains. She was intelligent, cultured, and spirited, a woman of formidable will and immense power. At the age of 15, she married Louis VII, King of France, becoming Queen of France and bringing her rich lands to the French crown. Their marriage lasted for 15 years and was marked by growing incompatibility. Louis was pious, ascetic, and rather uncharismatic, while Eleanor was vivacious, worldly, and loved courtly life. Their union produced 2 daughters, but crucially no male heir, a major source of anxiety for the French monarchy. The strain in their marriage reached its peak during the Second Crusade, which they both joined. Eleanor's unconventional behavior and independent spirit on crusade, along with persistent rumors, further exacerbated tensions. Upon their return, the marriage was irretrievably broken. In 1152, after much deliberation and against the advice of some, Eleanor and Louis sought an annulment on the grounds of consanguinity, meaning they were too closely related by blood. According to canon law, while such annulments were common for political convenience, the context of their high-profile divorce for lack of affinity was still a significant event for a reigning king and queen. The annulment was granted in March 1152. Eleanor was free, but with a condition. She retained her vast Aquitanian lands. This was the first seismic tremor of controversy. A divorced queen, no longer bound by her French marriage, and now the most desirable heiress in Europe, controlling vast territories that stretched from the Loire to the Pyrenees. Every powerful lord in Europe would want to marry her and control her lands. The true scandal, however, came with her next move. Just 8 weeks after her annulment from the King of France, Eleanor married Henry Plantagenet, Duke of Normandy. Henry was 11 years younger than Eleanor, a vibrant, ambitious, and energetic young man who was already making a name for himself. He was also the son of Empress Matilda and the grandson of King Henry I of England, and thus the leading claimant to the English throne. The speed of the marriage was shocking. It was unseemly for a queen barely divorced to remarry so quickly. More importantly, Henry was in feudal terms a vassal of the French king. The marriage was deeply controversial because it created an immediate and existential threat to the Kingdom of France. By marrying Henry, Eleanor brought her immense territories, including Aquitaine, Poitou, and Gascony, under the control of the Angevin Plantagenet dynasty. This meant that Henry, already Duke of Normandy and Count of Anjou, now controlled a vast swath of western France, a larger and wealthier territory than the French king's own royal domain. This created what became known as the Angevin Empire, a sprawling collection of lands that dwarfed France and presented an unprecedented challenge to the French crown. Louis VII, Eleanor's former husband, was furious. He had foolishly allowed her to retain her lands, believing she would make a lesser match or that he could control her. Instead, he found himself encircled by a powerful rival, who now controlled more of France than he did. He saw the marriage as a direct act of aggression and a betrayal. The two kings would engage in decades of conflict over these disputed territories, a rivalry that would define the political landscape of Western Europe for generations. Controversy extended to the perception of Eleanor herself. She was now seen as a woman who had broken with convention not once but twice. Her rapid remarriage to a younger, dynamic vassal was perceived by some as opportunistic and defiant, even scandalous. Yet for others, it cemented her image as a powerful, independent ruler who monetized her own will and the interests of her vast inheritance. The marriage to Henry II, which brought her the title of Queen of England in 1154 when Henry became king, produced a large and formidable family, including 5 sons and 3 daughters. Among her sons were Richard the Lionheart and John, both future kings of England. But even this family, destined to become one of history's most powerful royal dynasties, was fraught with internal conflict. Eleanor and Henry's marriage, initially driven by shared ambition, later soured. Henry's infidelities, particularly his open relationship with Rosamund Clifford, deeply angered Eleanor. She eventually supported her sons in rebellions against their father, leading to her own imprisonment for 16 years. Despite the personal strife, the marriage of Eleanor of Aquitaine and Henry II was a political earthquake, transformed the map of medieval Europe. created a formidable rival to the French monarchy and set the stage for centuries of Anglo-French conflict. Eleanor, at the heart of this storm, remained a towering figure, the most powerful woman of her age, whose controversial marriage laid the foundations for one of Europe's greatest empires. Her legacy is one of defiance, power, and the enduring impact of a woman who shaped the destiny of two kingdoms. Number 9. Theodora and Justinian, the first of the Byzantine Empire. 525 AD. In the rigid hierarchy of the Byzantine Empire during the 6th century, the idea of an emperor marrying an actress, a woman from the lowest rungs of society, was not just unconventional. It was deeply scandalous and truly controversious. Yet this is precisely what happened when Justinian I, the powerful and ambitious ruler of the Eastern Roman Empire, fell in love with and married Theodora, a woman whose origins and profession would have normally rendered her utterly unsuitable for such a position. Theodora's early life was a stark contrast to the imperial purple she would eventually wear. She was born around 500 AD, the daughter of a bear keeper for the Hippodrome, Constantinople's grand chariot racing arena. From an early age, she and her sisters worked in the theater, a profession that in Roman and Byzantine society carried a deep social stigma. Actors and actresses were often considered prostitutes, living on the fringes of respectable society. Contemporary sources, most notably the historian Procopius, in his Secret History, describe Theodora as a talented and captivating performer, engaging in risque and even explicit theatrical acts which would have made her background even more shocking to the conservative elite. Justinian, on the other hand, was from an aristocratic background, though not of the direct imperial line. He was the nephew of Emperor Justin I, who, being childless, took Justinian under his wing and groomed him for succession. Justinian was intelligent, hard-working, and deeply religious, with a grand vision for restoring the glory of the Roman Empire. The exact circumstances of their meeting are not fully known, but Justinian became utterly captivated by Theodora. He was drawn to her wit, her sharp mind, her strength of character, and perhaps her unconventional past. He saw beyond the social stigma and recognized a remarkable woman. His desire to marry her, however, faced an insurmountable obstacle: the law. Roman law explicitly forbade senators and, by extension, members of the imperial family from marrying actresses. This was a social barrier cemented by legal prohibition. The controversy was immediate and profound. Justinian's uncle, Emperor Justin, and his aunt, Empress Euphemia, were fiercely opposed to the match. Empress Euphemia, in particular, a woman of deep religious convictions and traditional values, was horrified by the thought of her nephew marrying a woman of Theodora's background. She actively worked to prevent the marriage, reflecting the widespread outrage and disapproval among the Byzantine elite and the church. For them, such a union would be a degradation of the imperial office, an affront to morality, and a dangerous precedent. Justinian, however, was determined. He possessed an unwavering will, and his love or obsession with Theodora was powerful enough to challenge centuries of tradition and law. He managed to persuade his uncle, Emperor Justin, to change the law itself. In 525 AD, Emperor Justin issued a decree that lifted the legal restrictions on marriage between men of senatorial rank and actresses, specifically to allow Justinian to marry Theodora. This act was a monumental and unprecedented change, demonstrating the extraordinary lengths Justinian was willing to go for her. It was a clear abuse of imperial power in the eyes of many, pushing the boundaries of what was considered acceptable for a ruler. The marriage took place shortly after the law was changed, around 525 AD. It was a private ceremony, perhaps to minimize public scrutiny, but the event was nonetheless known and discussed throughout the empire. Theodora, despite her scandalous past, embraced her new role with dignity and intelligence. When Justin I died in 527 AD, Justinian ascended the throne as emperor, and Theodora was crowned empress. alongside him. This was the ultimate realization of their controversial union, a woman from the Hippodrome now sitting on the imperial throne, holding immense power and influence. As empress, Theodora proved to be a formidable and effective ruler. She was not merely a consort, but Justinian's closest advisor and partner in governance. She participated in imperial councils, received foreign envoys, and played a critical role in shaping state policy. She was known for her intelligence, political acumen, and iron will. Her compassion for the disadvantaged, particularly for women and former prostitutes, led her to enact significant social reforms, establishing shelters, and passing laws to protect women's rights. Her past, however, continued to be a source of controversy and dark whispers. Procopius's Secret History, written years later and only discovered centuries later, painted a viciously negative portrait of Theodora, exaggerating her promiscuity and depicting her as a manipulative, cruel, and vindictive figure. While much of Procopius's account is considered slanderous and biased by modern historians, it reflects the deep-seated prejudice and moral outrage that some segments of Byzantine society held against her due to her origins. Theodora's most famous moment of controversy and defiance came during the Nika riots of 532 AD. A massive and violent uprising erupted in Constantinople, fueled by political grievances and factional rivalries. Justinian and his court were on the verge of fleeing the city. It was Theodora who stood firm, delivering an impassioned speech, reportedly declaring, "Royalty is a good burial shroud." Her courage and determination rallied Justinian and his generals, leading to the brutal suppression of the riots and saving Justinian's throne. This moment cemented her image as a powerful and indispensable empress, capable of defying death and disaster. The marriage of Theodora and Justinian was a living testament to an enduring controversial partnership that defied social norms, challenged legal precedents, and reshaped the Byzantine Empire. Theodora, the actress from the Hippodrome, ascended to the most powerful position in the empire, proving herself a capable and influential co-ruler. Controversial origins remained a talking point for centuries, but her legacy as empress, her political skill, and her impact on Byzantine law and society firmly established her as one of history's most compelling